It's lovely to have you all here in this session and to see a lot of familiar faces and many new ones. My name is Jeannette Ickovics. I'm the Dean of Faculty at Yale-NUS College, and I spent almost 30 years at Yale University in public health, medicine, and psychology. So I'm really delighted to be here with the panel, esteemed panel, and all of you. I'm just going to kick off with a few opening remarks. According to the World Bank, global health spending is expected to increase to more than 18 trillion worldwide by 2040. That's 18 trillion. As you know, there are more than 4.5 billion people in Asia, and we face some unique challenges, though some that are global in nature as well. The aging of the population, the rapid expanse of chronic disease, in particular here, diabetes and hypertension and heart disease. In this broad ecosystem, we see rapid growth of health tech, the focus of our panel today. We see CRISPR and genomics and proteomics, digital transformations in telemedicine, wearables, and innumerable apps. I'm sure even in the 3 minutes since we've been here, 3 new apps or 10 new apps have already been founded. We've seen great breakthroughs this year in medicine and public health over the last couple of years, cure for hepatitis C, gene therapy for leukemia. The Nobel Prize in Medicine this year was actually on circadian rhythms, our daily wake and sleep cycles. In the business and the finance sector, we've seen the collapse of Theranos. We've seen the potential merger of CVS and Aetna. And I'm eager, and I'm sure many of you are eager to see what happens with Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, and JP Morgan as they strive to transform healthcare for their employees around the world. We are living longer. Are we living better? And what is the role of technology in this sector? So I'm going to open it up to these gentlemen here and begin with a question. What are the promises of health tech? What are the challenges? And what is your organization doing to contribute to advances in this sector? So we'll start with Chris Hall from Fitbit.
Thanks. So I think the world we live in today, there's more and more things demanding our attention. So often staying active is not always a priority and probably gets less and less of a priority. So companies like Fitbit are designing technology to help enable people to focus on their health and become more active. And really the mission of Fitbit is to help everyone in the world become more healthier through driving engagement.
Great. Joseph.
I represent the AID group from Hong Kong, based in Hong Kong, a health tech fund. Myself is a medical doctor, so I think for the next 5 to 10 years, we are seeing a lot of the aging population, particularly important in Asia context of turning into retirement age. And we are dealing with a lot of aging diseases. So our company focus is to try to bring and help new company who bring health tech to the market, which solve real life challenges.
And we'll hear more about those real-life challenges and some of the solutions that you bring in a moment. Jeremy Chow.
Yes, I'm Jeremy from BGI, so I might replace Ning, as you might see from program. So I'm Jeremy from BGI. So BGI is shortly called the Beijing Genomics Institute. So it was established for the Human Genome Project back to 1999. So our aim is to decode the genome in the very beginning. Nowadays, we are more or less in the stage of understand the genomes. We can read and then we can understand. I think the next stage or next step is to change the genome like CRISPR-Cas9, like we can edit the genome more targetedly, or even we can write the genome. We can synthetics. We can write the genome from scratch. Maybe we can revive the dinosaur by the end of the day, like the movie. It's not a fiction, but many challenge, I would say, as you just mentioned. So not only the technical challenge, but as well as policy, as well as ethics, I would say, as well as public awareness, because people talking about like gene, they might link with GMO, so they might think this is something bad. but technology always has two sides. Depends on where the people, how they use the technology. Thank you.
It's kind of amazing when we think that, I believe it was just in 1954 that the DNA double helix was described for the first time.
Yes.
That's in some of our lifetimes.
Yes.
Not mine, but some in the room.
Yes.
Lee Hun.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Lee Hun. I'm from a local startup company called Meraxis. And we've been around for 4 years. A lot of people say, if you live by 4 years, there's a decent chance you may live for the next 2. So based on, 99%. So what we are doing is very focused. Jeremy, BGI, they work on the whole genome. We only work on a very specific part of that called microRNA, which is the smallest piece of genes you can ever find in the human genome, right? So what we are doing with the microRNA is really to mine that information to look at, can we detect cancer at a very early stage before the clinical symptom shows? And how we are doing that is by using our core technology, which is detecting microRNA, and also the biomarkers that we work with various clinical institutions globally to identify it. So I think the war to fight cancer is about getting the community aware to be more proactive in doing cancer screening. And that is the job of more than just one company or one hospital, but the entire village. So we want to contribute by playing that small part of it by developing a accurate, accessible, affordable liquid biopsy test with actionable results.
Excellent. And Julian.
Good morning. My name is Julian de Saladeri. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Galen Growth Asia. We sit at the epicenter of that tripartite relationship between corporates, investors, and entrepreneurs within the space of health tech, aka digital health. Digital health in Asia Pacific is the second largest market in the world by value, and I'll come back to that. This is why we believe it's a very exciting space. That digitalization of healthcare represents an unprecedented opportunity to transform healthcare in Asia Pacific, and we do have some major issues to overcome. And I truly believe, and so does the team behind me, that digital and digitalization will transform that space. I'll give you one data point: 90% of diabetics in India go undiagnosed.
This is the Asia Summit. Let's stick with Asia for a moment and ask, what is unique about the opportunities here in Asia with regard to health and tech? And we'll start with Julian again, but anybody can jump in after that.
This is an excellent question. I think the digitalization phenomena is creating opportunity not only for innovation at price points that are becoming more affordable. I think business models that are more easily built, and therefore the barrier to entry into hacking health, as we have at our title, is much more likely to be achieved. I think we're seeing a change of attitude and appetite from investors and large organizations such as Big Pharma, as is related to innovation in this part of the world. And so as a result, we're starting to see H1 2018 total funding in digital health or health tech is at $3.3 billion. Now the US closed at 3.4. So it gives you a flavor of just how fast the space is growing. Now China represents a lion's share of that momentum, but we're seeing some very fast-paced innovation growth as well as funding growth in Southeast Asia and India.
Other comments on Asia-specific progress or challenges?
Yeah, I would say in Asia what's unique is governments and health systems are becoming more progressive in prevention and looking at ways that digital therapeutics can help empower individuals to help be part of their own improvement program. So that's very interesting.
Jeremy, you were going to jump in.
Yes, because BGI is actually a Chinese-based company. We are based in China, which means we are very good to assess the number of the patients. That means something we have done in China is really big project already. Is good to validate technology, which for us can be easier to assess to the nowadays Southeast Asia, and also of course the national scheme like the Belt and Road strategies that government encourage company organizations to go abroad, that we can not only to build the technology, but as well as we can build the standard, to build the guideline, to build policy as well, because some of this country are really lack of regulation, really lack of know-how. That means for this region is quite diverse, like we're in Singapore now, but what are the other countries that are around this area, like Myanmar, Cambodia, Indonesia is more like kind of behind, where we can really help to build a quite uniform strategy that can make the standard of healthcare or the standard of disease screening better by the technology has already been validated in China.
So you've talked about, you just mentioned a few things that I think are worth picking up. Of course, the diversity of the region.
Yes.
We've got, the ASEAN, the Southeast Asian countries, which are include Singapore, but also more developed nations. We have China and India, just in terms of sheer population growth and diversity, intra-country, let alone inter. And then we see huge differences in access issues, of course, with all these technologies and with healthcare. So do you have different strategies for, if you will, more developed versus developing nations? What do we need to think about in terms of adapting technologies or practices in one country to other places in the region?
Yes, we do. In terms of technology-wise or science-wise, because different population in terms of their genes or the genome is different. So we cannot use Chinese data or database to apply in Caucasians or apply in Indian. But as you might know, Chinese population is more or less similar with some of those countries in Southeast Asia. So for us, we can build a relatively close database, but for specific country or specific population, we have to build their own reference. We call reference or baseline for each of this country to make more accurate diagnostics, because some diseases are really, really regional specifics.
Lee Hun, you're dealing with very specific technology. Is that accessible everywhere?
I just want to elaborate
affordable?
on Jeremy's point, right? A couple of things. Let's take gastric cancer as an example, right? And gastric cancer used to be the #1 cancer in the United States in the 1930s, right? Today, it's out of the top 10. So a lot of things have changed in terms of disease incidence, in terms of how people look at a particular disease, and that affects how you develop a diagnostic or how you implement a diagnostics, right? So in Singapore, where this is a medium to low incident gastric cancer country, right? A diagnostic is mainly used as a rule-out test, because in the National University Hospital, they do about 170 gastric endoscope to find one case of gastric cancer, right? So when you have a blood test, how the physician like to use that is to say who doesn't need a gastroscope at this point. You stratify patients to really find those that immediately need it and those that don't need it. And the ultimate goal is to reduce the cost for the healthcare system, because gastric endoscopy is expensive here.
So that's part of the question,
Yeah.
is there access, not just in Singapore and Hong Kong and Beijing,
Yeah.
but is there access to microRNA technology all over
Yeah.
the region, and is it affordable?
Exactly. So before the panel started, Jeremy and I were just having the conversation in terms of microRNA can be detected using sequencing, using qPCR, or using microarray.
Yeah.
So we chose to use qPCR because it's a very mature technology. It's available in most of the hospital labs. So the reason we chose that is to make sure we get the greatest accessibility in terms of implementing such a technology, right? So when we look at different markets, we like to see it as each market is a 0 to 1 process. It doesn't mean that we have done something good in Singapore that we can take the model to China, right? The affordability is very different. The reimbursement system is entirely different. People's awareness are very different. So to us, taking even the same technology to a different market is a 0 to 1 process.
So I'm going to come back to markets in a moment. I promise we'll get to some of the financial sector things. I just want to push a little bit more, and several of you have mentioned policy. So the Ministry of Health in Singapore has urged us to move beyond health to healthcare, beyond healthcare to health, beyond hospital to community, and beyond quality to value, right? Beyond healthcare to health, hospital, community, quality to value. So how do advances in health technology enable us to achieve these goals? And in particular, not just diagnostics and treatment, but really thinking about prevention, for instance, and other opportunities.
So your point is correct in terms of the geographies that make very different complex strategies, and certainly through the work that we're doing with investors and large organizations who are starting to look at their digital health strategy across the region. If you look at the value chain of healthcare, there is certainly a huge effort around the R&D side. But at this stage, of course, those are very early stage pieces of work. You can neither put in quality nor put in value at this stage. What we're seeing in terms of a trend is a significant focus around the patient experience or that patient journey. And largely, I think that is because if you take out the mature markets, so really focus on developing and new frontier markets, essentially most of the patients are having to pay or co-pay, self-pay or co-pay for their own medication. Because if there is universal healthcare, it's actually a very small amount of money contributed towards health. And so the patient is the driver in this part of the world, as opposed to Europe or the US, and increasingly will be the driver. And so that patient is already seeking value. And so if you look at that patient journey from, unaware through to treatment and ongoing treatment for chronic disease, for example, you'll see the digital touch points are expanding very, very fast, either through the patient driving for those, or the individual in the road driving for those, or the innovator identifying a way of applying digitization to that particular touch point. And so if you look at where is the money going, to use that follow the money expression, you'll see the lion's share is actually driven towards patient touch points and how to help that patient get an answer to their question and therefore seek value for their money.
So I have to push on this P word, patient, patient, patient.
Yeah.
And at one point you backtracked and said, or the individual. So, in public health, of course, and there's a number of us in the room, we want to be thinking about people, about prevention, about, not just patient-centered, but person-centered.
You're right. I mean, so the industry, the incumbent industry,
yeah.
and in large part investors are very focused on the patients because there's an identified, a person identified with the particular issue needs seeking help and therefore more committed to that journey. But you're absolutely right. There is that prevention argument coming up. But the challenge of the prevention question is that the business case of prevention is still unproven, whereas the business case of curing is proven. And therefore, monetizing that is a challenge in Asia. And Chris will probably know a lot more about this in terms of the prevention angle and how do you actually, or what are the mechanisms to achieve that outcome.
Chris, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I would agree with Julian. I think the Ministry of Health has it right. Bringing consumer-centric solutions to the market is cheaper, it's scalable, and most often it has better outcomes. So the legacy systems that exist today are not very nimble. So the solutions that wearables and digital therapeutics are bringing are a tremendous benefit to consumers and patients.
I think the issue on prevention and on the, is that it's often invisible.
Sure.
And so you're right, this question of valuation is difficult, can be difficult, but no less important and perhaps more important, certainly in terms of health, but also quality of life and the expense, again, not just the financial cost around health care, but the human costs.
No, you're right. And you mentioned the JP Morgan, Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway and Amazon tripartite, and we'll see what comes out of that. But I think what you'll see in Asia increasingly, and we're certainly seeing that, is insurers and employers starting to work out how they leverage value propositions like Fitbit, for example, and its related programs, to take ownership or to help the employee take ownership of their health was a huge component on prevention.
That's right.
Largely because everyone understands, one, cobbler's children. If you're going to advocate better health, you might as well start looking after your own employees first. But secondly, we spend 240 days of our lives at the office, and therefore there is an obligation from the employer to help us take a responsibility for our health.
So in terms of, we'll run down this path a bit on some of the financials and ideas around investment. And I'll also mention, we'll chat here for a bit. We'll open it up for some questions as well, of course. So what are some of the most important qualities, particularly those in the investment side, that you are looking for in a company in which to invest? How do you measure impact and success, both prior to your investment as well as post-investment?
Oh, can I take that? I think it's very important in a company that they are developing their own IPs which differentiate themselves from others, and the capability of able to transform, to make a difference in management of any chronic diseases. As a result of their invention or the algorithm or their systems or their diagnostic in whatever area, they should be able to be measured by the impact of the final products in the market. So to measure success is not difficult, because when you see the impact on transforming how medicine is being practiced in the ordinary normal sense, from the intervention of the new health technology, which makes a difference either in terms of cost saving, effectiveness, prevention, and the ultimate outcomes of management of the diseases.
How else?
So I mean, IP is important, don't get me wrong, but in this new world of data and software, it's becoming rapidly irrelevant. You move so fast, so really it's about speed. And so I would advocate that the two things that most investors are now looking for in this new paradigm we're moving into is, one, the team. Can that team continue innovating, and do they have the perseverance to make it happen? The number of knockbacks have been enormous. And the second one, is what is the pain point you're actually solving, and are you actually solving that pain point? There's a lot of technology out there, and A-Star in Singapore is riddled with it, looking for a pain point.
Yeah.
I would just add one point too, is I think technology is becoming cheaper today. So I think it's important. The tendency is to get out there and just get it out on the market. I think what's important to make sure that the research is being done, the right research and the right clinical outcomes, that the efficacy is there for those solutions. So.
What do you think the pain point is? What's the pain point in your trajectory?
Well, so we are from the other side, right? So we're talking to investors and we're asking the same question: how do we get the money? But in terms of the pain point, I mean, cancer screening, everyone acknowledges is important because cancer incidence is rising. But I think the pain here is the same as any preventive medicine. Is how do you convince people when you're absolutely healthy, when you absolutely don't feel any symptom, to say, I should spend maybe just $5 a day, right, to look at prevention monitoring, right? Because if you do the calculation, $5 a day, you calculate for 30 years of cancer prevention screening, it's going to cost less than a single dose of the most advanced targeted therapy, right? But how do you convince people to do that, to shift from treatment to prevention? That's the pain point in terms of early diagnostics, and we're still looking for a solution. So be very happy if any of you can give me, an idea of convincing people.
Oh, I thought you said some money.
Well, your tagline, Lee Hun, is "To know is to act," and I think that really speaks in a way of this, taking action and some individual choice, and I think that fits also with Fitbit, though you're sitting on completely different sides, in a way, right? I mean, we're talking about wearables versus, as you say, micro RNA, not just RNA, but this one of the smallest segments.
Yeah.
So, what kind of action are you taking, Chris? Again, and what are you encouraging your consumers to take? And we were talking just before, tell us a bit about the partnership with Google globally.
Sure. Well, maybe I'll start out with saying that I think there's a shift in healthcare today towards really understanding the psychology of people and behavioral change and how to influence that. So we're looking at mechanisms for that. We know that incentives, and Julian mentioned in the workplace that employers are incentivizing good health. The payers are doing that now. Government's beginning to do that. So that's very important. And what are the mechanisms to help people change? Putting those things into a digital platform or a wearable are showing to deliver better results than some of the solutions that exist a decade ago. And we're very excited we just announced, I think just a couple of months ago, our partnership with Google. that they will manage our healthcare data and help us aggregate our data into the hospital EHRs, as well as work on an AI solution together. So interesting, maybe not a well-known fact, but Fitbit just a few weeks ago hit 150 billion hours of heart rate, so now becoming the largest repository of health data in the world.
Mm-hmm. What are you going to do with that data?
I could answer that question in a lot of ways. I think, companies...
There's researchers like me that, would love to.
Yeah, I think obviously we've got a lot, and enables us to be in a unique position to do machine learning on those data, and really understand how we can personalize the solutions much better.
Just today in my inbox, it was the August 30th edition of JAMA. There was an article from Jeffrey Hinton from Google Canada describing the potential transformation in healthcare by using deep learning and artificial intelligence. Thoughts, comments?
Well, my comment would be that AI is a much used term at the moment, and most of the startups that I see wandering through with their pitch deck talking to me about AI, I discover usually I'm just looking at a standard algorithm that's just been labeled as a marketing term. Even Samsung's using that now to sell their new Note 9. AI is an enabler, it's not a solution. So yes, it represents a fantastic opportunity across the entire value chain of healthcare. We're seeing R&D, we will see R&D transformed by AI and machine learning type applications once we've got that right. And recently the CEO of Novartis was on record at the World Economic Forum saying as much in terms of that's his focus going forwards. So it will play a very important role. There are a number of ingredients that are required to be successful in that space. And it's I guess become a bit of a hot debate, which is who in healthcare will possibly take the lead globally in this space. I think there is a grave danger of spending too much time looking at the US, when China will probably run away with the trophy, so to speak. And I think that's largely because of data. The previous panel talked about genomic challenges. The US challenge is 1 million. Singapore is 1 million. China is 100 million. Mm-hmm. That data means that logically their machine learning will be smarter.
Mm-hmm. I just want to add to that. I think a prerequisite to AI or machine learning or any of these is the quality of data. Right? When it comes down to healthcare, it is about well-curated data. And ideally for an individual, you are not looking at just one single point, but longitudinally across a fairly long lifespan. And that data would be valuable. Today, exactly, everybody talks about, hey, I've got a million data points, and I'm going to do AI. But if these data are rubbish, so rubbish in, rubbish out, right? So we got to start people talking about the quality data before we even move to AI.
True.
Yeah.
So we talk about quality. Sometimes quality and precision can be used interchangeably, which leads me, of course, to this notion or the practice of precision medicine. And again, for some of us, I guess I'll ask Jeremy maybe to define precision medicine for the audience here, for those who may not know it. And I'll say also that some experts believe that these will result in great breakthroughs, including some of you up here on the podium. Others are more skeptical. And so I'll again sort of try to jostle you all by saying, what is the promise of precision medicine and precision data? And how can we still assure that we leverage opportunities to invest and improve overall health? So we've got this, you're right, the deep dive, but we also, and we also need to think about, broad population health. So.
Yeah, I just want to continue what Lee Hun just mentioned, that we're trying to develop AI or so-called machine learning. So this is all based on the quantity and the quality of the data. So also what we're trying to look for as we established for the Human Genome Project. You might know the first Human Genome Project cost $3 billion and take 20 years to sequence only one human genome. And nowadays with the latest technology, costs less than 1,000 US and within maybe 2 or 3 days. Amazing. So that's how the technology was drive this these things move forward, not only scientifically, but as well as big data. Because when we face big data, you never know what things you're going to find. Because before the traditional medicine is the evidence-based medicines or hypothesis-driven medicines. But nowadays it's more or less like big data-driven. Once you have the big data, you never know what you are going to find. For us, we have some data or applications. Really, we find some incidental findings that really is not linked with, we're doing the testing A, that testing prenatal testings, but we found cancer in that patient. So what we're going to do with that, we're going to collect more and more data. So maybe in the future, to sequence a genome or sequence the DNA can be free. But maybe as a sequencing company, we have to pay you to buy your data and how to keep the data in terms of privacy, in terms of safety. I think more and more technology people are talking about blockchain at this moment. Blockchain, AI, in BGI we call BI because we call this as biological intelligence. Mm-hmm. So we're going to apply the multi-omics. So not only genomics, we're trying to maybe link with Fitbit, the wearable devices data. You might never know how the data they cross over. You might never know. So this is the beauty of the data and the beauty of nowadays we're talking about precision medicine. So precision medicine is more about to save money. It's not to cost you more. So in Chinese we call precision medicine 精准医疗. So it means very accurate. But this is not something for the rich people. It should be for everybody because affordable means accessible. So we're trying to build a more or less affordable method, or even offer this for free, or even working with different local government in China and also government in other countries, trying to reimburse and trying to develop how we can link science together with the clinical side to lower down the cost, where we can do everything together, all in one.
To supplement what Jeremy has said, not only to reduce the cost, but also to prevent unnecessary treatment,
yes,
and also to improve clinical outcomes of the patients. So not only that we are talking about saving money, but
Sure.
we are actually improving the quality of care. And I think the importance of applying artificial intelligence, deep machine learning in dealing with good quality data is that you can integrate a lot of different type of data. You mentioned genomic, multi-omic, and you also can integrate the digital health record into the same platform. Mm-hmm. And adding to that, you can even add on the lifestyle, the food eating habits, mm-hmm. Exercise habit, sleeping habit, and that's a lot of whole spectrum of information you can integrate into the big data. And then with a good algorithm, you can actually make some sense and correlating things that may not be so apparent before.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to open up to questions in just a moment, but I want to pitch one of my favorite questions, and I'll start again with you, Joseph Wong, because you're a technologist, you're an investor, and you're a physician. How do we balance high tech and high touch?
I think once you have to set out your the target or what you're trying to achieve from making the investment decision, of course, I think both things, if you think about the financial implication and also the technological aspect, I think the both of them, they go hand in hand. I mean, I don't see there's any possibility of a very innovative company producing a solution to solve unresolved issue, real life problem is not going to be financially successful. So I think we are looking at the same thing, but you are actually taking into a different perspective.
Anybody else want to take the high tech, high touch?
I might just add a comment that, I think at least from Fitbit's perspective, the goal is not to replace health, physicians and care teams. I think they both will work hand in hand. Obviously, the digital perspective is delivering messages on a continual basis, the right times, but nothing replaces a physician or a care team to be able to put a hand on a patient's shoulder and show empathy. So I think the way those both work together is going to be very meaningful.
I think, one of the challenges we have, and Fitbit may have some data on this, is behavioral change.
Yep.
How do we get the average Joe or the average Jill to actually care about their health? It's probably a little more marked over here when you have to fend for yourself in developing markets. But back in the US and in Europe, when it's pretty much given to you, how do we get people to care for their health and therefore take ownership and therefore engage high touch?
Yeah.
I think it's so important to, I'm actually a behavioral scientist by training and work in public health, and we know how hard it is to nudge health, and so we'll take any evidence-based approaches that work, and we need to be thinking, as all of you have said, really in terms of cross-sector solutions. We know that health is incredibly multi-determined, certainly beginning biologically and genetically, but also all of the environmental nudges, most often, not pushing us in the right direction. And so I think this leveraging of the tech and the touch, and not just even in the healthcare setting, but in our businesses and our families, our businesses, our schools, and our communities. And also we've seen some of the best successes around policy changes, because then we really change the entire environment for a population. And so here in Asia, where we've got, again, very diverse nations, we've got huge countries, and some with rather strong policy opportunities, we could use those to improve health for the population. And I would say also, you mentioned, really beginning at the earliest stages in life, before we become vulnerable, and really think about prevention.
Yeah.
All right, I have some more questions, but why don't we open it up to some of you to begin, and please introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is Vikas Garg. I'm from A Billion Veg. I'm just curious, in terms of hacking health, how much do you guys, obviously medication, AI, big data, all of these things are great, but what about just the back to basics approach of health and sort of consumers being responsible for their own health? There's a great book called The Blue Zones, and Dan Buettner spoke at the LA conference, but the book is about basically parts of the world where there's very, very low incidence of the things that kill us in our 60s and our 70s, the cancers, the diabetes, the heart disease, all of that, and the commonalities that a lot of these parts of the world have, and more so how through Blue Zones, through his program, he's been able to replicate that very successfully in parts of the US where there's a high incidence of obesity, and really been able to reverse those things through a very back to basics approach. So how much do you guys, being out here in Asia and seeing obesity rates go up and up in places like China, how much do you guys think about that? Because maybe that potentially is also, if it's not a simpler solution, maybe it's something that needs to be coordinated along with the technology that you guys are building.
And because, of course, A Billion Veg, you're talking about, we all have to eat, and what do we choose to eat, and what's available to eat, and what is affordable, and then how does that interact in terms of a risk or protective factors?
Because food is obviously a big part of how you end up in life in terms of health.
Of course. And sadly, food trends are changing in Asia as most Asians become consumers and adopting increasingly Western type diets. So we the back to basics program is commendable. The challenge is getting traction and scale with them. I'm hoping that some of the technology access that I guess the average consumer is getting to, or is getting their hands on, is going to start enabling some of that type of back to basics in terms of take care of yourself, take care of the basics, to use your term, and you will prevent down the road the complications of your life. But we're back to this question around behavioral change. Most people will look at their stocks and shares on a daily basis, but very few people are looking at their vitals on a daily basis. So there's a whole shift of mindset required that hopefully technology in your hand, gamification, and other types of behavioral change methods will hopefully get us there. But I have the same debate you have with most of the people I know back in the UK, from where I originate from, who will continue to complain about the state of the NHS and its bankrupt status. But my question back to them is, what are you doing not to be a burden on the NHS? And they look at me completely puzzled.
I think we have to, let's stay down this path for a moment, but I think we have to also acknowledge again the great diversity and access issues from the richest nations to the poorest. And one other thing to keep in mind is, and as I look around this room, and maybe we're special, but obesity of course is growing and growing. But here in Asia too, we see diabetes and heart disease and other risks even without visible obesity. So these things still remain important. So other back to basic kinds of things, any other response to Vikasa? The blue zones, of course, is about food. It's about daily physical activity. It's about faith. It's about community.
Well, if you look at all the sanitarians in the world, they normally live in remote area, not in a city. They don't have modern technology to help them. Instead of getting on to a car, then you have to walk 5-10 miles to whatever you want to get to. So basically, we are what we eat, we are what we do. So public education has a lot to play in terms of educating the citizens what they should be doing to look after their own health. But I think in health technology-wise, one can utilize the current tracking device and the digital health record to put in, to back up the change that we're trying to mold into our citizens. So when they discover and convinced that after changing the behavior, they see the benefit of their health, then that further consolidate the changes. So that's also very important.
Other questions? Yes. And then we'll take you in the back. And 1, 2, 3, 4.
I'm Ritesh Maheshwari from S&P Global Ratings. I'm not from the industry, so I'm going to represent an individual. You talked of an individual. You talked of various data sets that are available, like genomics, lifestyle, habits, and activities. How does an individual, you're talking of behavioral change as well, how does that person get personalized kind of advice, guidance on what to do? Because your diet depends on genomics or gene, and the activity that you do, it's not an easy one. There are various parameters which end up driving. So how do you think the industry will address that?
Well, maybe I'll share an example. So, we recently launched a clock face to help change behavior, which is really interesting. It's called PET. And basically, if you get steps in, your pet gets fed. If you don't walk, your pet becomes very unhappy with you. So it's a novel way to get people to change. We've seen an increase of 50%, in activity, and it's a cheap thing to deploy, but it's something that people enjoy and they have fun with. So.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I think in terms of the big data and the individuals, you have to always link them together. So we are trying, we recently have also some demonstrations project that we recruit more or less volunteer that we collect all the data together, and they have they get different kind of testing, and they also contribute their own data, like they link with their wearable devices. They record what they eat every day, and then they will get the feedback that there's a red dot for these individuals and how they will sit in the position of the whole group. So maybe there's a major group of the parameters is healthy, like as a reference. But if you are sitting behind or below, that it means this individual might have some problems, or you might have some change if you want to look back to the big data. So this is kind of a demo that we can show to you. But as more and more data, that means more and more kind of prediction value or prediction power. So in future, so this is kind of how to link with individuals to the big data in terms of genomics, in terms of lifestyle data.
I'm watching the insurance industry with interest to try and address your point. South Africa and Italy were one of the greatest countries for fraudulent, let's say, claims on car issues, to keep it simple. The introduction of telematics in relation to the vehicle has changed behavior and claims substantially. So how applicable is that to the human being?
And I'll sort of jump in with this perspective of saying, this balance of tech and touch and risk and vulnerability, there are a number of things that we can all do and should do, a back to basics approach that we know will support our health and well-being no matter what. Food, physical activity, sleep. Sleep is increasingly more important. I mentioned earlier the Nobel laureate this year in medicine was around sleep, and so we recognize these things. And I think we can do all of this and should support our families and our communities in doing all of this regardless. And then here we really are talking about the use of technology, and that hopefully will be increasingly accessible to many in terms of diagnostic, in terms of treatment, in terms of potential recurrence and then sort of circling back. But there certainly are things we can use, and using digitals. And I'll say even the ideas of we look at a meeting like this, which is a very health conscious meeting, and the Milken Institute being a very health conscious place. And so we have water and not sugar sweetened beverages. We see, right? We have a lot of fresh fruit. And so we really need to be looking at changing the environment and policies in the tech and finance sectors, but also in the health and transportation and education sectors that can support good health for all of us, because the alternative is not only extraordinarily expensive, but it's, of course, something none of us would like. So we'll take a question from the back, and then the woman on the right.
My name is Peon. I'm a venture capitalist. A bit of a macro level question. A bit of a macro level question, please. Billions of dollars and billions of dollars are spent years after years by governments, by corporates, by foundations, by investors like us in healthcare to try to make improvements. One could argue that it's not well optimized across countries.
Right.
Is there anything that one could do, or we could do, what, if anything, to really make it more optimal and more effective? For example, could we imagine an immense data exchange across countries or corporates to try to share all the outputs of the basic research so that we don't have to redo it again in some other countries and spend billions of dollars that we could spend in other places?
No, you're absolutely right. And over 80% of funding that goes into medical research is wasted, is a strong word, but let's use that word today. And there's empirical evidence to support that. And the ROI of biotech research has dropped year on decade. Somebody coined the phrase a few years ago that was that medicine is an information challenge, not a science challenge. And I'd like to believe that some of the pain points exist on that research value chain we can start breaking down. That some of the issues are the lack of coordination between academic research centers, so there's duplication all over the place. The lack of reproducibility of some of the experiments, was they're badly documented, or the incentives are incorrect in terms of citations, etc. So if we can start breaking down those barriers by having access to the data, and to your point, can we have a big data pool of all that research? And some of the technologies we're seeing around, dare I say AI, but let's say an ability to analyze that data and come out with some better insights. I think hopefully we can get to a more efficient use of that capital. I'm hoping that, for example, real-world evidence will start becoming a much more significant role play in proving the efficacy of a product, and therefore slowly doing away with these phase 3 trials, which are 10,000 patients, and frankly, we're applying one rule for the whole planet with 10,000 patients as the data, at a very costly way of doing it. So it's a lofty goal, it's an aspiration, But I do think we are starting to build the capabilities to get there.
I'm just gonna ask this without wanting an answer because I want to make sure there's time there. But in some ways, isn't the business incentive one? The competition incentive is one that, really is fostering, of course, the siloed health and siloed information.
It is, and therefore it's going to take a significant level of coordination in the industry, including the governments, who try and change that model. Yeah. But the taxpayer bankrolls early stage. Yeah. The academic research takes the IP and sits on the royalties, and then the rest of the value chain continues to make money along the way. The resulting effect is Gilead's latest CAR-T technology is $375,000 a pop. Yeah. Who can afford that? Which payor is going to continue paying for that? So we need to change it.
All right, let's hear.
Hi, I'm Laura Entwistle. I run an organization called Emancipaction, and we work with child victims and survivors of sex trafficking and their caregivers, specifically in the area of wellness and their mental health. And so the question for the panelists is really around the opportunities that you see for technology to help advance access and outcomes in the area of mental health. Please.
Great question. Thank you for expanding that way.
Maybe I'll take that. So Fitbit is really keen. Mental health is one of the focuses for us. And I think it's an area that's often underfunded and under-researched. What we're doing is now we have on the wrist a way to capture how you feel, which can be a detailed algorithm that can get deeper, and perhaps in the future be a pathway to get people to either talk to their boss or their GP or a clinical psychologist. So I think that will certainly be very helpful in Asia, where you've got stigma, but it's something that I think needs to be invested in.
We know that if we look around this room, 1 in 4 of us will have a major depressive disorder in our lives, and probably every single one of us has been touched by mental illness ourselves or family or friends or loved ones. So I think it's a really important to destigmatize, to bring this forward, and to use technologies. There's quite a lot of technological advancement and push in this area, for sure. We're about out of time, I think. All right, last question, and then I'm going to ask our panelists to close.
It's a quick one, no mic necessary, small room. Can you talk, the underlying theme throughout your panel, much like the last one, the gentleman on the left was in the audience on the last one, at least you indicated as much, has been big data and how that's changing your space, certainly on this side as well. You've spoken to it quite a bit. Simple question, how is your hiring mix and skill set shifted in the last 24 months, and how will it shift going forward? So what's the mix? I'm really curious of those that focus on chemistry and biologics versus CS, engineering, statistical analysis. How has that mix shifted in the last 24 months, and how do you see that continue to shift going forward? And how do those two disciplines culturally blend within each of your own organizations, as they often kind of have various perspectives?
That was not a short and quick question.
You should have never let me go.
Clearly. All right, I'm going to let you take any bit of that as you'd like, and I'm going to ask you all also to begin your closing remarks, because my clock here and the hand sign in the back are a bit different. So a bit of that around the balance, the investment, and also, what do you think, and if the answer is partly in reference to this gentleman's question, but what do you think the most exciting product, program, investment will be for you that will transform health, not just healthcare, maybe healthcare, but healthcare and health over the next decade? What do you think is the most exciting program, policy, investment?
Okay. Tough gig. So through the work, so we're a small organization, so our shift is probably not really particularly indicative for you, but certainly we're seeing a shift much more towards data science and through any other skill set. Through the work we do with large corporates, hospital providers and investors, we're certainly seeing a shift towards online, digitization, data science type skill sets. Particularly in this region where a lot of the large corporates you talk to tend to be much more sales and marketing type organizations rather than the full value chain, let's say. So that's in itself a limiting factor, because that KPI tends to be sell more of the original product rather than necessarily embark on new disruptive journeys. But in the last 12 months, we've seen a distinct shift from indifferent to, let's say, I'm a wannabe in this space. To try and answer your question, for me, I'm looking with a great deal of interest at the whole real-world data, real-world evidence space on two levels. One, we're starting to see some really interesting platforms that are able to aggregate the data and draw some very interesting insights around the efficacy of product, for example. Or the interesting play that I'm seeing come through, which is how do we start aggregating some of the disparate platforms into one? Because there are a lot of very small point solutions out there. But if you put them into an integrated solution, if you've got something actually much more valuable to the investor, but therefore to the patient, for example.
All right, I'm going to stop you there. Lee Hun.
Yeah, so we probably can represent a bit of that shift, because when we started, it was a whole group of scientists, right? Biologists, chemists developing master mixers and qPCR stuff. But in the last 12 months, what we first did is to engage medical professionals. We now even have 2 clinics running in Singapore. This is really to bring the technology to the people, right? And in the most recent, I just came back from Beijing, and we're hiring an internet team there to basically, again, raise the awareness, right? So the shift is really a necessity, because we are focused on cancer early detection, screening, and which is really not something the hospital does. It's a community effort. So we realized that for a biotech company to really be able to venture into that space, we got to build all kinds of capability to bring technology to the people. And I really love the gentleman's comment, back to basic. And I think in order for us to do that, the technology needs to be so accessible, affordable, and invisible to all of us that we're actually doing it every day without realizing. And that data, can be a personalized data that of course, someone still have to aggregate and analyze that data. But the technology must be there so that, that data can be collected.
Lee Hun.
Yeah, Jeremy. Yeah.
Jeremy Chow.
Yes. So I think definitely a shift, because more and more data is generating. It's more so genomics, or this whole field, life science, is getting more and more crossover. So not only biology, but as well as physics, chemistry, as well as information technology as well. I think it's a big shift, and also it's a very crossover fields for us. And we're doing from basic research all the way to translational medicines and the applications. So for us, looking for the next decade is more or less, because the mission and vision for BGI is benefit human beings. So for us, it's trying to decrease the inherited disease that we can prevent. And for cancer, we're trying to work for more kind of affordable, or we can save the cost for testing, as well as for the medicines, as well as to increase the quality of life for the patients. And by the end of the day, we can really transform from patient care all the way to health care. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Joseph Wong, again, I'll ask you to be brief, and wearing, in a sense, all 3 of your hats. Okay. I'm sure there are probably many more.
Our group believes that the most important impact over the next 5 to 10 years will be in the treatment of cancer patients. Because if you look at the statistics of diagnosing early cancer versus late-stage cancer, early cancer patients, 2 out of 3 survive in 10 years, whereas the late stage, 4 out of 5 is already gone. So if you can actually diagnose cancer very early by the use of a combination of various technology in liquid biopsy, of course, microRNA is one. The others include the cell-free DNA, circulating cell DNA, circulating tumor cells, and also maybe also in epigenetics. If you combine all these health technology in predicting and offering a early cancer detection solution, that would really make a huge impact on cancer patient care.
Fitbit was one of the earliest in this space broadly. You'll be 20 years old in 2027. How do we celebrate your 20th birthday?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great birthday. and I'll give a short answer to make up for some of the long answers. So I think, delivering consumer-centric solutions that are on the body, real-time, continuous, and AI-driven.
All right. Well, I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank all of you. And I'll say that it's really all of our responsibility across many sectors. I wish we had, we didn't talk about ethics. And maybe we can do that over coffee or drinks this evening. I think that's one area that we miss, thinking about the ethical revolution. But I hope that we all are involved. It really will take a big village and for all of us to catalyze and transform solutions in health. So thank you very much, and l'chaim.